For me, when I think of authenticity, it's really about being true to who you are and feeling comfortable doing that too.
In being authentic in the workplace, it does need a space, an environment that actually welcomes that.
If you're coming into the workplace and saying, well, this is who I am and this is how I show up, I think that could also be very problematic if the rules of engagement have not been defined.
If you see someone who is doing something intended to be disrespectful and harm someone, then that we're not talking about authenticity anymore, but they have ulterior motives.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Inclusive Workplaces with Amara. I'm your host, Dr. Amara, and on this podcast, I share strategies and best practices, as well as stories on how to build and lead a more inclusive workplace. The title of today's episode is Professional or Pretender: The Silent Struggle Behind Bringing Your Whole Self to Work. And joining me on this episode is none other than a special guest, my very special guest, Audrey Namdara-Walsh, and here she is. Welcome to
Hi, Amara.
Welcome. Thank you. Welcome to Inclusive Workplaces with Amara. I'm so happy to see you. Welcome.
It's such an honor to be here with you and to be hosted by you. Thank you, Amara.
Thank you, Audrey. I know for those of you who may not know Audrey, I want to just quickly give a short introduction. Audrey Namdara-Walsh is a passionate leader, bridge builder, and advocate for authenticity in the workplace. She has over 15 years of experience in international program management and strategic partnerships. Audrey has driven impactful initiatives across education, health, and public policy, and is often tackling complex intersecting challenges. And I'm super excited because you're bringing a lot of your experience to this episode. So I'm very excited to hear what you think about this topic: professional or pretender, the silent struggle of bringing your whole self to work. Yeah, I'm very excited to have you.
Very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Let's just start with the reason why I wanted to have this conversation was because I saw a post on LinkedIn by another friend. Her name is Leslie Nidek, and she was talking about how impossible it was to kind of chuck your emotions at the door. And I thought, yeah, that's so true. We need to talk about that because everyone keeps saying, yeah, bring your whole self to work. But then how do you exclude that part of yourself? And I thought it might be a good idea to actually talk about this and maybe have a conversation around this. So I want to start by talking about this topic around authenticity. What does it mean, actually? What does it mean to be authentic?
That's a very good question. And I remember when you invited me to the podcast, I actually thought about it and I said, but what is authenticity? And that's based on the background that I looked at myself saying that I am Kenyan, originally Kenyan, born and raised, and currently living in Germany. And when I thought about, so what is my authentic self? And I thought about, but I wear different identities because I've needed to conform, right? I needed to fit in, for example. And so in this discussion, I sort of took a walk back into history to think, when was I authentic, or how did I build up my authenticity, or what does that mean to me? And for me, I thought, yes, even despite having different identities, that I do show up, fully my own self with my core beliefs and values, and also the perspective on what is right. And I thought that is being authentic, meaning that I still show up. I'm still showing up today as I am, giving my opinion, my perspectives based on my values, my core values, beliefs, and also with this perspective of what is right or wrong. And I thought, yes, and in the workplace, this is what authenticity actually means, you know? This is the definition I'm bringing here, or that after reading and researching and wondering, you know, what are different people talking about authenticity and what does that mean? And this is what I thought, yes, this is what it means very generally.
I like that. I like how you encapsulated that. You said it's about really living your truth. And not only that, sticking to your values and being able to share your perspectives through that lens. And I think that's so important because sometimes yeah, if we feel that our perspectives or values are not in tandem, then there's a likelihood that people would want to kind of hide or cover, right? I think that's brilliant, and I think that's important. For me, when I think of authenticity or being authentic, it's really about being true to who you are and feeling comfortable doing that too, right? Because the only way you're ever going to be authentic and be yourself is if you feel comfortable. Because and at the same time, if you go to a place and you're kind of hiding, pretending, people can spot that very easily. You can tell when someone is being fake. So it's really important it's really important to kind of own that space. And that's why this conversation is so important, especially in the workplace, because our companies have a tendency to say everyone should come their full and authentic self. And this is basically how people talk about inclusive workplaces. But the thing is, like, what does that actually mean, right? Have you ever thought about that, like this idea of bringing your whole self to work?
Yeah. And Amara, let's just actually take it from there, because as you were speaking, I had ideas like saying, yes, so what does it, we've defined sort of like what it means in a person, but what does it actually look like and what does it not look like? And there are a couple of things that you've brought up already, saying that, okay, so it's showing up with your truth, being true also to your core beliefs and attitudes. One thing that we do say is, in being authentic in the workplace, it does need a space, an environment that actually welcomes that. So just having a banner of inclusivity does not mean necessarily that it allows that for you to show up, right? And that's also because authenticity is a very relational concept, right? It means that I can be here with you to show myself, but with respect, that I actually have the emotional intelligence to see, what is it that I'm doing or saying that might be making you uncomfortable, or are we on the same vibration, right? So having that intelligence, emotional intelligence, and thinking about respect and listening and understanding the other person. So authenticity is pretty much, it's not only what has to be, what I do myself, but it's a relational concept that means that we actually create the environment for me to be authentic or not, right? And so that in the workplace, it means that, do you feel safe enough and comfortable to show up the way you are? Is there an environment where there's a sense of belonging? So do you feel like, you're included, that you're part of this community, whether it's your team or with the organization? Do you feel that, you do belong? Is there sort of like psychological safety involved, in the sense that I can come and actually speak my truth and say and share my concerns, without having a fear of, something personal happening to me? So can I take that interpersonal risk and have an honest discussion with you to say, okay, I think we're going in the wrong direction, or perhaps we need to consider this other person, or perhaps we need to broaden a particular understanding, for example, right? So it's based on trust, inclusion, a sense of belonging, and also this psychological safety that I myself can take an interpersonal risk. And I think it is in this perspective of the risk aspect and the whole situation about trust that authenticity can be very tricky in the workplace. And at this point, I also said, so what is it not? Because often people think authenticity just means showing up, telling your whole life history, stating, unfiltered sort of like comments or opinions that actually are harmful to other people, or not having your own boundaries. So saying no, learning when to say no. And that's not what authenticity is. There's a sense of integrity when it comes to authenticity. So this is what it is. It's not. So it's not just being open, or it doesn't mean that you have to have a deep personal relationship with everyone, that everyone needs to know you. No, there's an integrity. Plus also in the workplace, we have to understand that we have to adapt to the expectations that have been set there. And also there are these unspoken, unwritten rules for professional conduct. So it means this delicate balance between showing up as your true self and also looking at the environment within which you're playing at and maintaining that delicate balance. So I think these are some of the things that, we have to take into consideration when we're talking about authenticity. So it's both
Yeah,
something
I agree
that
with
you
you.
show up with, but does the environment actually accommodate that, and what needs sort of to be there in that environment?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think what you've done actually is kind of set the scene for an area that I think it's important to talk about, which is some of the advantages of bringing your full self to work. I mean, your authentic self to work, and some of the challenges. And you've kind of given a good foundation on what needs to be in place.
Yeah.
I'd like us to kind of talk about some of the advantages, and I know that we've actually had this conversation before, and we know that when you bring your authentic self to work, it really allows you to connect better. It allows you to collaborate better. You're able to connect with one another in the workplace. You feel psychologically safe to speak up. I mean, those are the advantages if you're able to do so. If that environment has been enabled for you to really show up with your creativity, your own individual and authentic and unique perspective in solving problems, also leveraging on your own built experience, lived experience in the, from whether your background and so forth. So being able to tap into that element and bring that into the workplace, you're really able to add a lot of value to the work that you're doing. So I would say that that's one advantage, and there's several more. So maybe we can discuss some of the advantages and some of the challenges that could come.
Yeah.
Because also when we think about bringing your authentic self to work, if you also have maybe a different way of behaving and you're not really being respectful of others, that could become a challenge. If you're the kind of person that likes to yell and and maybe you don't really know how to control yourself, well, that's just how I am, that can be very tricky. So maybe talking about those challenges too and how we can offset them would be a good segue. Go ahead. What are your thoughts?
I wanted to add to one advantage, which I think is quite obvious to us as well as we're speaking. I mean, the more that people can feel safe, have a sense of belonging, that they can fulfill their roles, well, guess what? Organizations are then able to actually achieve their goals and objectives. But more so, they end up being people who then thrive on innovation, because this is where innovation happens. Because if someone says, no, I think we're going in the wrong direction, or you have a work environment that is also open to trying new things, then this is where innovation happens. This is where the change, this is where basically you get to the tip where you basically become a trendsetter. But where you basically have, and this is where we're going into the challenges, where you have very rigid structures, right? Where it's basically you have, leadership that basically speaks and assumes that their ideas, that their political views, or how they view the world, or how things should happen, is what the whole staff or the other team members have. So having that assumption means that other people below that would think that, hang on, am I allowed to voice a different opinion? Or they feel a dissonance between, okay, that's not what I believe in, but can I say that? Or, should I not? And so it means that that's one of the challenges. So this is having this environment where people cannot express concern. And it could be actually the value of the organization, right? But then they miss on that when people are not able to talk about, any concerns they have. Another challenge, I guess, that's also tied with this is conformity. Yeah. So people then conform, just because the risks are too high for them personally. Either they will be misunderstood, or, they will be basically not be put up for promotions, whether that's, like in the sense of getting more clients, or even at a different level. So what they will do is they'll have that fear and say, okay, I don't want to pass that opportunity. So what do? Nod when I need to nod, smile when it needs to smile, because that's what the organization says. That is what is of value, right? So when you're pushed into conformity, this is what happens. So people stop sort of like trying to, like, okay, should I do this? No, I just want to stay put. I want to stay safe. So this is where, because psychological safety has been taken out, they then, sit there looking, they don't engage. So if you don't have people who engage, so this is where you find, you're speaking to a team, but guess what? It's only the team leader who's speaking, that other people don't have a voice to question that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to also look at it through a different lens. I mean, yeah, I think what you're saying is really important in the sense that fear plays such a critical role in how people show up. And where there is a lack of psychological safety, they're definitely going to hide, cover, conform, like you rightly said. But I'm thinking about also this idea of bringing your authentic self to work and what that means. If you're coming into the workplace and saying, well, this is who I am and this is how I show up, I think that could also be very problematic if the rules of engagement have not been defined. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are on that. When people come to the workplace with a certain kind of ideology or standard, that could also clash with other people, right? So if we're not talking about what boundaries there are, then we may be actually setting ourselves up for a toxic work environment as opposed to one that is inclusive. So I'm just curious to know about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation. And when I think about that, I think about, we go back to the core of what authenticity means. Remember, we started with saying that it's basically showing up with your truth.
Yeah.
And you bring in quite an interesting dilemma in the sense that your authentic self, this is what I think it entails. You will not always be liked for your authentic self. That's the reality. You're not always going to be everyone's favorites. You might rub some people off, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you don't have to set boundaries or not show up for yourself. The thing is, we do notice that if you're speaking your truth and if you're mindful of other people, how you're showing up, understanding that you've got the emotional intelligence to understand that, okay, what I might have said might be offensive to other people. Do you have mechanisms to self-correct? So this is where it goes back to, do you have self-awareness, right? That you might be doing something that is harmful, like stepping on someone else's truth. Yeah. And that recognizing that other people also come to work with their authentic self that might not be aligned with yours, but they're showing up the way they are.
Yes.
Now,
exactly.
having said that, Amara, here's the distinction. If you see someone, for example, who is working or basically is doing something that is actually intended to be disrespectful and harm someone, then that we're not talking about authenticity anymore. We're talking about they have ulterior motives. Yeah, that's not authenticity, because true authenticity should accommodate other people's authenticity, right? While still staying true to yourself. So this is where this sense of self-awareness, and I think in most workplaces, people confuse this brute behavior, this toxicity, as authentic, because the individuals sort of either have also positions of power, right? And so they think
how I show up. That's
exactly,
how I show up. Yeah.
exactly. And what you do is it attracts similar people who use that for means of maybe, climbing up the corporate ladder. And this is what we actually see most of the time. This is why people say it's amazing that we can still have people who are horrible, and just to put it gently, but are not supposed to be in positions of leaders, but are actually in positions of leadership, right? And this is because, their motivations or intentions is basically elbowing and pushing people up so as to attain their power, their presence and whatnot. And so it also becomes then very clear that their motivations are different, that's basically the rules of engagement.
Yeah, that's great. I think that you hit on it. Actually, there are some key words that you mentioned there, and that is this aspect of self-awareness, right? So the truth of the matter is when we come to the workplace in our whole selves with our truths and We show up in the way that we are most comfortable.
Yeah.
Having that in place does not necessarily mean that we want to also come there under this guise of, authenticity and also cause harm to others. Because the
Yeah.
truth is, if you say you're coming in with a particular way of being and somebody else is coming with a particular way of being, if there's no understanding of how to relate with one another, that becomes problematic. And therefore,
Yes.
self-awareness becomes extremely important. Like you mentioned, when we're self-aware and respectful and we're empathic, we're able to really understand and listen. We're able to appreciate the perspectives of other people. We're able to delay judgment. And these kinds of behaviors can really help to create a more collaborative work environment, a more collaborative way of engaging with one another. And so, yeah, I really like what you said there about the need for self-awareness, the need for
Right.
just really recognizing how you show up and being mindful also, even though we know that there are examples of people who do abuse power. In essence, if the culture of an organization is one that really recognizes the importance of self-awareness, critical self-reflection,
Absolutely.
empathy, psychological safety, if this is integrated into the fabric of the workplace, then we can really make a difference in how people show up. And then, of course, it makes it easy for people to come to work, feeling supported and feeling that they can be authentic in the way they position themselves and present in the workplace. Right.
Absolutely. Beautifully put.
Yeah, thanks. So then that makes me think, what is an ideal workplace? Like, what steps need to be in place for an ideal workplace? When you think of an ideal workplace, what adjective would you use to describe this place?
I mean, I think we touched upon it, Amara. And we already talked about there's certain key values, right? That, any organization can adopt. So we wouldn't say that it's only for one sector or another sector. But
Mhm.
if a workplace truly embodies and advocates for empathy,
Mm.
they advocate for mutual respect, and they advocate for inclusive participation, right? Mutual participation, then I think these are really anchors that, at the end of the day would work in any model, in any business sector, any type of field where basically encourages people to be themselves, to engage in the mission and vision of the organization, and also to innovate and to really contribute to the things that the organizations are doing, to helping each other, to growing themselves, to also modeling certain
Yeah.
behaviors, right? So you want to look at it also as a container as to how are we promoting such an environment that also the organization, even if people leave, there are values that are built into people who would then go and pollinate other environments with similar values and attitudes, right? So remember the concept or the idea that, hurt people,
Yes. Yes.
right? So the same philosophy, and if we look at Taoism, if that is true, it means that supported people support others, right?
I love that. Yes.
Yeah. And so it's also this responsibility that even in our encounters today, if you can pay that forward, do the same in another setting, then guess what? We're going to have more and more organizations, people modeling over these, I would say, universal concepts of, empathy, respect, and inclusive participation, right? And so it's something that would grow beyond that. And I think these are core in organizations, but also in our personal lives, right? The way we are engaging together today, we come in mutually respecting each other, that I want you to be seen as well. I incorporate parts of your story into mine and think, oh yeah, she said that, and I want to model that in my next life because it speaks also to my truth, right?
Yeah.
It speaks to what I say is actually right, So there's right or wrong, evil and good, whatever way we want to put it, but that speaks to my perspective on what is right. And if we have organizations modeling these, I think we're in a good way.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really like what you said there about organizations modeling these values. And I think a
Yeah.
great example of how we can use it concretely
Yeah.
is through very, I would even say mundane, but extremely important things like giving feedback, for example. So,
Right.
how do we give feedback to staff? What's the methodology for that? Are people
Mhm.
scared to receive feedback? Do they understand what because in very concrete terms, these are ways in which leaders can show up and and really promote these
Right.
values in terms of how they give feedback to their staff, how they take feedback, if they ask for feedback, right? Even the
Right.
leadership having, they should get feedback on the way they're leading and with their acting or in the workplace and the way they're
Absolutely.
delivering as well. And we should also look at even what is the company or the organization's perspective around team building? Is it like a one-off thing, maybe once a year? Maybe in December there's a team building. Is that what it looks like? I mean, it's like in real terms, like what does it mean to have these values embedded in the ways of being in the workplace? Even when it comes to leadership development or basically recognizing staff, what is the culture around that? I think tangible things that can really impact how people show up and can also impact the business. I don't know if there's some
Right.
other concrete steps that people can tap into and really make it concrete in terms of how to integrate those values into the ways of being in the workplace.
Right. And I mean, you've touched on most of them. And I think it's so important for organizations to not look at it as ticking a box that, we do this, but there's an intentionality that is needed here, right?
Mm, yes.
Meaning that there has to be a feedback loop. So just because you had one team event on one day, once a year, does not mean, you park that day, you put it there and then forget about it the next time. There should be continuous or feedback loops in very many different ways. So another thing that I thought is not only just the feedback loop, sort of like in terms of not only managers giving
Mhm.
feedback to employees, but also employees back. But there's also an aspect of how else can you get information, right?
Mm,
So
yeah.
by adopting sort of like an overall coaching, like we will do professional personal development for our staff to really look into how to integrate some of these values that we talk about into their own professional development. So it becomes a living thing. Because remember what I started with saying that authenticity is actually a relational concept.
Yeah.
It's human to human, right?
Yes. Mhm.
And so it's not just something that you develop in one day.
Mhm.
No, just like every human being, the way you have grown or the way you keep growing your identity, today you're a mother, tomorrow you're a father, you're this, you're this. It's the same thing. For you
Mhm.
to become, authentic, it's growing in your self-awareness. And humans are like onions. You peel one, you discover something else.
Mhm.
So it means there's intentionality and
Yeah.
also understanding that it's a continuous process that needs repeating,
Mhm.
right? It's also checking, like when we talk about inclusivity, what does that mean?
Mhm.
Looking and assessing, because can you imagine, for example, in your workplace, that you only have one group of people from one nationality? They would understand themselves as being inclusive because they would say, for example, no, we have women and men, we also
Mhm.
have like different groups, religions here in the context of the country, right?
Mm.
that
Yes.
of that little community. But introduce an external other person, inclusivity then takes a different look, right?
Mhm.
It
Absolutely.
means, for example, we were not used to hearing this accent. That's new. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Or, we usually dress, in suits, but they have come in with their sari or they've come in with their African attire. Oh, so are we
Mm.
being able to include that? So these are aspects that we also need to constantly look at is,
Mhm.
are the meanings that we talk about, are we living those in a different context?
Mm.
So that's why it's something that you continuously have to look into as different people come, yeah, in and out, teach you. So you get that feedback, you get that learning experience of what it means to have empathy, right?
Mm.
So not
Yeah.
just towards one person, but say, what does it look like? What does it mean, for example? How would I recognize that a particular team member might need that empathy? Are we allowing them to be open? Yeah. Are we open to feedback? Are people able to come and share personal risks about them or concerns that affect them personally and also their output at work? Do we allow that, or is that not allowed? We don't speak about that because in our culture we don't do that at work. So sometimes you hear people saying, oh yeah, no, we don't do that, that's not something we do. But that's okay. But will you allow someone who also has the experience of doing that do that, right? So it's also appreciating that other people do show up differently, respecting that. And of course, I still bring it within the confines that, yes, we are in a professional environment. And so we need to adapt to the environment as long as you're engaging in that way, in the way, we've set up, okay, you're supposed to do A, B, C, and D, that you are adapting your authenticity according to that. And also just being professional, right? So it means that you're being respectful to other people, that you're actually watching, how you speak with other people. Are you being respectful as well? Are your comments and feedbacks, being filtered? Because some people think, oh, I'm speaking my truth, that's my opinion, but your opinion is harmful to other people. So would you also accept that feedback or just say that's your opinion? So these are things that need also to be, in place. And these are values that leaders and organizational leaders and also team leaders need to continuously instill in the team culture. And because we also understand culture as being, it's not a constant, it's constantly changing, right? It's evolving. So it means that aspects of that need to be redefined, look at it from a historical perspective. How did we act? Where do we need to now, consider? How do we grow? How do we evolve? So, yeah. So it's an intentional and an active, continuous sort of feedback loop.
I like that. It's intentional and it's a continuous sense of reflection as well. And I think there's no better way of communicating this and also instilling it in the workplace than onboarding. When you're onboarding new staff, because every time you bring a new person comes to work, or a new employee or a batch of employees, using the onboarding framework can also be very helpful in ensuring that there's alignment when people come into the workplace, especially when they're coming from a different maybe work culture, coming to the workplace and making sure they're embedded into the culture of the workplace would really make a huge difference. So really, really very insightful. And I'm hoping that our viewers out there are able to take advantage of some of the wonderful points that you've raised during this episode. We're going to be wrapping up. But before we do, I definitely want us to, summarize some of the key points that we talked about. I'll start with you. What are some things you want for people who are listening in? What is something they should take away from what we've shared today?
There are many things, but if you ask me for three things, I think my top things would say that being authentic has more advantages than any disadvantages. I've not seen any disadvantages so far, except when, for example, your motivations and intentions are different, right? It really has a lot of advantages as well to showing up authentically. A second thing is to understand that also the work environment, because we talked about authenticity in the work environment, because it is a relational concept or thing, it means that organizations also need to actually have the environment that supports authenticity. It means they have to be intentional about allowing openness, allowing participation, allowing inclusivity, growing trust in the organization, right? Having also, strong relationships within strong and trustworthy relationships, growing a sense of belonging. These are aspects that the organization also needs to put in place to allow people to be authentic. Because guess what? When you get into an environment where you are not able to, for different reasons, maybe because The culture does not, has a very dominant culture that, or set of values that they push that go against your values. So you conform. So what you do is you get people to conform, but they will never be their true self. So it stops engagement, it stops innovation, and basically a toxic environment. So I would say that the second thing is intentionality. And a third thing also is to also in our talk to also be aware what authenticity is not about, right? Authenticity is something that it has an integrity aspect with it. So it doesn't mean that you don't draw boundaries with yourselves, what you can do, what your beliefs systems are. So it means that you need to be self-aware, who you are, what your values are. Be also aware of your core beliefs and values. We all have beliefs and values that are socially grown. So you need to be aware of that, so that when you go into there, you say, okay, is my perspective being blurred by my own beliefs, right? And also then accepting that there could be other ways of showing up and respecting that. So by having your boundaries, and it doesn't mean that you have to, some people think that, authenticity means that you have to open up to the world. No, that's not what it means. You don't have to have deep personal, relations with everyone at work. No, that's not what it means. And it doesn't mean that you can just show up and give any comments or feedbacks because that's what you are. No, that's not. You have to, that's not what authenticity is about when it harms someone else, right? You have to note and say, okay, so how do you filter your truth, if it is truth, to other people so that they too can show up and with their truth and say, okay, we have two different truths then, depending on what our perspectives of what is right or wrong. So, and I think those are the three things I would leave the audience with.
Thank you for sharing that there. The three main points that you want people to take away is one, being authentic or coming to work in your authentic self, bringing your whole self to work is a good thing. It's advantageous, right?
Yes.
There are more benefits to it than challenges, like you mentioned. Secondly, the workplace it's a relational environment. It's a place where we basically have to depend on one another, right? So it's really important that the workplace culture creates a kind of environment that allows people to really do exactly that. And lastly, self-awareness is extremely key in the way we engage with one another. Sometimes we need to also reflect on our belief systems, our core belief systems, and how that might color the perspectives we hold and the way we engage with one another. And I think that is so important. I would also add that there's one word that kind of brings everything together for me, and that is collaboration. The workplace is a place where we are creating products, services, and supporting people, helping people. The more collaborative we are, the more we are engaging with each other and coming to work fully, the better we are in coming up with new ideas, solving problems, and really empowering people around, especially those that we serve. So yeah, I feel like what you've shared, thank you, what you've shared here just kind of again reinforces the idea of an inclusive workplace is extremely important because it allows us to use or bring our individual talents and gifts and to work collaboratively to solve and meet our goals in general. So yeah, this is very, very useful, very, very helpful, and very much aligned with what I believe when I think of an inclusive workplace. Thank you so much, Audrey.
Thank you so much. It's been just so much fun just talking about this because it's something that is important because at the end of the day we do work for quite a number of hours during the day, and I think how we show up in our workplace also reflects how we show up in other spaces. So it's something that you look at. How are we also encouraging, the values that we want to foresee in the future all over the world? Yeah. So no, thank you so much for having me. This has been great fun.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure sharing our thoughts around, how we can really bring our authentic selves to work in a way that is also empowering and supportive of others that we work with. Right. I think that's the main thing is actually about showing up, respectfully, showing up, showing
Yes.
up with an empathic ear, and showing
Yes.
up as yourself, right? That's very important. So Audrey, I would like to also invite our listeners and people who are watching this to connect with you on LinkedIn. Is there any other thing you'd like to add in terms of what you're doing currently, what your passions are, what you can also offer me for those who are listening?
Yeah, that's a whole new, different discussion at the moment. But yes, please, if anyone wants to touch base with me, connect, have me as a speaker on their panel, on their podcast, just like you, Amara, to have a conversation, because I think what it is indeed is a conversation. These are not things that are set in stones, but I think through sharing different experiences, and also from a personal perspective as well, I think that brings a lot more interest to audiences. So, with my background in clinical psychology, public policy, I think I bring like quite a diverse, set of experiences in different sectors. So happy to connect on those and have those conversations. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Audrey. And thank you
Thank you.
everyone for thank you so much. And thank you for
Yes.
everyone for joining in. For those who are on the replay, please, leave your comments and subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. It's
Yes.
been a real pleasure. It's been a real pleasure having this episode, sharing this episode with you. And until next time, be well. Thank you and
Thank
goodbye.
you. Bye.